debate. The honourable member for Toronto Centre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think all of us in this House will recognize and understand that suicide is something that has touched all of us in one way or the other, either as family members or as friends. And what I think we've also come to realize more and more is that this issue can no longer be regarded simply as one of a personal tragedy, which it undoubtedly is, but it also has to be recognized as a political issue, in the sense that it's an issue that the public has to take notice of. And the good news in all of this is that if we take notice of it and take action, that there are actually things we can do to reduce the number of people who lose their lives in this very tragic way. Now, Madam Speaker, the statistics are frankly overwhelming. We have, in the industrial world, we have a relatively high suicide rate in Canada. We are the only country, modern industrial country, that does not have a national strategy to reduce the level of suicide, to save lives in a very significant way. And I think Canadians would be surprised to learn some of the statistics, the numbers. The fact that over the last 30 years, at least 100,000 people, 100,000 Canadians have taken their own life. That is a truly remarkable number. We heard today from the President of the Canadian Psychiatric Association, who told us that around the world last year, nearly 1 million people took their own lives. And so we developed this capacity as societies to take statistics and to get the numbers, but it's important for us as a country to be able to take the steps that will make a difference. Madame la Présidente, c'est clair que si...
Madam Speaker, it's clear that if we show the political determination to do something, to take action, we can come up with solutions. And it's important to note that in the province of Quebec, discussions have taken place. It's been above and beyond partisanship, and people have noted the high number of young people, the unacceptably high numbers of young people taking their own lives, and in the province they decided to do something, to talk about the situation in schools, to get rid of the taboo surrounding the subject. We need to do everything to enable young people to talk about their emotional states. And it's important to note that in Quebec, the suicide rate dropped significantly and has done so over the past 10 years. But as Canadians, we didn't have the same success Canada-wide, and at the federal level, veterans, former soldiers, Aboriginals are committing suicide at unacceptably high rates in a society that's marked by its compassion and frankness.
We can all agree, as I hope we can all agree, that a good society is, among other things, is a place where people care about each other. Where quite simply we care about what happens to ourselves, we care about what happens to our families, we care about what happens to our friends, but our compassion does not end at the end of our garden. Our compassion extends to our neighbors. And our understanding of what we in Canada face has to include the fact that there are a great many Canadians who today are in turmoil. Today, this day, as many as 10 people will take their own lives. And we all think, and we can just show a little bit of imagination and think about who those people are. A young girl living on a native reserve. Perhaps she's been abused as a child. Perhaps she's living in a house where there are as many as 10 or 12 or 15 people sharing a room. She goes to school, and on the computer in the school, she sees a very different world. She sees a world of wealth. She sees a world of opportunity. She sees a world of affluence. And she looks around her community and she sees the opposite. And she asks herself, where is the hope? What hope do I have? I think of a young boy who discovers in his early adolescence that he's gay, and who realizes that his sexual identity is not that of the majority of people in his classroom, and who sees himself in a different way, and who's looking to find the ways in which he can be as much a person as the person sitting next to him at school. Because he's seen himself as sees as different, he's bullied. Perhaps one of his classmates goes on the internet and starts making fun of him, starts singling him out. Think of the young teenagers who are in turmoil for all kinds of reasons. All of the biological and hormonal and other changes that are happening in a bewildering world in which they're living and in which they have to show themselves to be okay. They're not allowed to be anything other than okay. And perhaps they live in a house where it's hard for them to say, I'm not okay. We think of the veterans who've come back from the trauma of the battlefield in Afghanistan, who are never allowed to show weakness on the battlefield, who are never allowed to show a moment of vulnerability. And when they return, they find a world where they don't know how to be vulnerable. They don't know how to deal with the world in which they're now living, the mundane, everyday world in which most of us live every day. We can't explain, Madam Speaker, all of the circumstances. The number of seniors, for example, who take their own lives is remarkably high, maybe for reasons that have to do with their loneliness, with their vulnerability, with their having felt that they've lived a life and now can't find meaning or purpose to where they are. Mental health issues, Madam Speaker, affect 1 in 5 Canadians. And yet it's an issue that's rarely discussed. We have fundraising drives for breast cancer and for prostate cancer and for heart conditions and for all of the other physical maladies, as well we should. But we don't have a run for suicide. We don't do a walk for schizophrenia very much. We don't talk about depression a great deal. We let people suffer in silence. And we pretend that it's not a problem. Now, we've made progress. It's not as bad as it was in days when, we've changed the legal structures. We've accepted as a society, we've learned how to celebrate sexual identity. The Prime Minister gave a wonderful speech in the House, a statement of reconciliation with the First Nations people. So we've made some of the steps that we need to make to begin to create a climate of hope, a climate of mutual care, a climate of love. But our actions don't follow the words. And so the motion that's before the House today, Madam Speaker, is a motion that says, first of all, let's talk about this. Let's have a conversation where we discuss frankly and candidly what should not be happening in this country. Gay kids should not be bullied in school. And schools need to learn how to help kids celebrate who they are, whatever their sexual identity is. Celebrate who you are. That's what the meaning of dignity is. If we're a society that believes in dignity and believes in compassion and believes in care, Every child has to have pride in that identity and pride in that who they are. But it goes well beyond childhood. And what I find, Mr. Speaker, in having even talked about this motion with some colleagues and then decided to put it forward as an Opposition Day motion, and I hope we'll have the support of the whole House, and I hope we'll have a good conversation today. I hope we'll have an opportunity for the House to show itself as it can be when we want to talk about issues that are important. We are behind the public. The public is ahead of us. Today I held a press conference with Stephanie Richardson, whose daughter took her own life last year in circumstances that are well known in the Ottawa area, and brought forward an incredible outpouring of emotion and compassion and feeling in the community. And that family has done a remarkable thing in turning a terrible tragedy into a moment where they can perhaps teach people what this is all about. And we need to do this as a parliament. The federal government runs the 5th largest healthcare system in the country. We are responsible constitutionally for Aboriginal people, and we're responsible for veterans and for our armed forces. The federal government can be the leader, can be a leader in this field, and we have not been. And people say to me, well, what about your party when you were in government? Didn't do enough. Nobody can say, from a partisan perspective, we've done all we can. Speaking very personally, having lost some friends to suicide, I can tell you the sense of bewilderment that one feels, and the sense is, what else could I have done? What else could I have said? What else could I have seen? But we know that there are strategies that work. We know that if we start to talk about it, it makes a difference. We know that if we begin to create the architecture of support for people and for families, we know if we address the underlying mental health and social and economic issues, that we will, in fact, reduce the level of suicide. We know that we can find a way to address this question. And we know that it's within our realm of responsibility to do so. I'm one of those people who thinks that the national government has a responsibility to work with the provinces in a coordinated fashion, not to dictate to anyone, because 7 out of the 10 provinces already have developed strategies. But none of them are sufficiently funded. None of them have enough grounding in this national conversation which needs to happen. So, Madam Speaker, on behalf of the Liberal Party, supported by my colleague from Vancouver, we have moved this motion. But we do not claim any monopoly of virtue on this motion. We do not claim that we have somehow achieved a breakthrough that others are not party to. There's no reason why any member of Parliament should feel that this is being treated or being put forward in some kind of a partisan way. It isn't. Yes, there will be questions about what could be done. And there will be issues about how we can allocate the funds that we need to make sure the conversation happens. But we also understand that there are at times issues that go beyond politics. I've often wondered why it is that governments have such difficulty in accepting that mental illness is every bit as much an illness as a physical illness. And my own modest assessment is that there are really 2 reasons for this. The first one is because there's a stigma and a taboo to mental illness that's still with us. We're not as deep and dark in the Dark Ages or Victorian times, perhaps, as before, but we still have to recognize and admit that it is not seen in the same way and it is not discussed in the same way as it should be. And we've made some changes, but we need to make more. And the second reason, I think, is because people feel, and governments reflect this, that well, yeah, it's an illness, but it's not an illness like a physical illness. It's something different, and that we really can't, there's not a whole lot we can do about everything, that somehow it's not something that can be easily or readily solved. And this, Madam Speaker, ignores a very basic fact. We have made huge progress in the treatment of mental illness. Conditions that were a guarantee of a lifetime of incarceration as recently as 50 or 60 years ago are today being treated very effectively with medication and with treatment that actually works. We're behind in research, we're behind in funding, we're behind in support, we're behind in housing, we're behind in all the things that need to be done to really integrate all these services together. But these are solvable. These are matters of political will. These are not conditions which we can't do anything about. There was a very famous French sociologist, Émile Durkheim, who over 120 years ago wrote a text called Suicide. Et Durkheim, un des grands...
And Durkheim, one of the great pioneers of sociology, noted something important, and that is that the lack of solidarity within a society is reflected in an event, the suicide, that to that date had been seen as a personal action without a social explanation. But he said, on the contrary, we can explain it. So the love that each of us has and shows for our neighbors is a permanent mark of our compassion and our sense of what it is to be a citizen, what it means to be part of a great society.
Is marked by how we care for each other. It is marked by solidarity. And so what we're really talking about today, Madam Speaker, is what it is that we owe each other and how our failure, our collective failure, to reflect in our actions that sense of solidarity and that sense of connection actually contributes to the sense of alienation and bewilderment that is a prelude to a decision to commit suicide. Not all the explanations are easy. Many of them will continue to baffle people. We all have friends, and when they go in this terrible way, we say, who knew? What could it have been? But what we do know, Madam Speaker, is that there are things we can do, and that it is not a hopeless situation. It is one where we have to take what my grandmother used to call the human footsteps. Every day, a step forward. Taking the human footsteps that take us to the progress we need to make as a society and as Canadians. This is a frontier we simply have to cross together. This world of anger, of self-anger, of violence that implodes, of violence that explodes, is a world that we need to understand better, and we need to share it. And we need to address it, and we need to take the steps together as a society that will make a difference. Hence the need, Madam Speaker, for a strategy that will in fact prevent people from taking their own lives and allow them to return, to be there with us, to live full and happy and productive lives. That is what it means to live in a place where we care for each other. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I want to take this opportunity to thank my colleague from Toronto Centre for bringing this very important issue forward. As he stated so eloquently in his speech, suicide is something that affects all of us, our families, our friends, and every member in this house I think, would state that we should be doing more as a government. He is also aware that the Minister of Health is from the North, and there is extremely high rates of suicide in the North, and she is committed to doing more. He also knows about the Mental Health Commission of Canada. It was established and it was endorsed by all provinces and territories except Quebec. And this is one of the things I would like to discuss with him about jurisdictional issues, because he has a unique perspective, being both a federal politician and a provincial politician, a leader of both parties in that capacity. And he knows about the draft mental health strategy that's been put forth by the Mental Health Commission that will likely address the elements of suicide prevention that he's talking about. But my question is this: we as a government are trying to work collaboratively with the provinces and territories within our jurisdictions. And I was wondering, does he feel that the federal government can dictate or force the provinces and territories how they deliver healthcare services within their jurisdiction? Because this has been a challenge with a lot of these national strategies. Could he comment on that, please?
The Honourable Member for Toronto Centre.
Happy to respond. I appreciate the comments from the Parliamentary Secretary. I'll just say a couple of things. First of all, as I said in my speech, I think one of the areas in which the federal government can lead is to clearly understand what are we responsible for. We're responsible for veterans, for armed forces, for the Army, for RCMP, where there are significant mental health issues affecting those workers. The whole federal public service is an area where we can do work and we can lead. And finally, the member mentioned it, and I know the minister has discussed it. But I do think when we look at the responsibility with respect to Aboriginal issues, we have to recognize the fact that we have not been able to do what we need to do. We do not have the programs in place that are leaders in the field at the federal level. I can tell you, and I appreciate your mentioning in a relatively kind way, which I'm actually not used to hearing from the other side with respect to my previous provincial experiences, but I would say that yes, of course, the provinces are very sensitive to the federal government coming in and saying, you know, this is what you're going to do. But that's not how it works. I would hope that mental health would be front and center on the table in the next round of discussions with the provinces. I don't think the provinces will be unready for that. I think they'll be ready and willing to talk about that. Of course, the provinces will look at it from an issue of funding. But one of the things we can start to do, I think the federal government can lead, is what are the best practices? What provinces are doing better than others? What provinces seem to have made some success in reducing the incidences? We have a universal problem of, particularly among adolescents, of an inaccessibility to the necessary services across the country. And nobody can look in the mirror and say we did enough. You know, we have lots of instances of kids running away from home. They got nowhere to go. We don't have the treatment centers in Canada that we need to have. We don't have them at the provincial level we need to have. So those are some ideas, and I'm certainly happy to discuss others. I think if one enters in discussions with...
Order, please. Order. I'm sure the Honourable Member will have more time to elaborate. Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Vancouver East.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And first of all, let me say thank you to the member from Toronto Centre for bringing this very important motion forward today in the House. I think it's really good that we're having this debate, all parties, and that we're focusing attention on this enormously important public health issue. And I think that's the first thing I want to say, is that it does go beyond the issue of personal tragedy. It is a public health issue. And I noticed that in the motion, and hearing the member speak, that the motion speaks about establishing a fund for National Suicide Prevention Strategy. And just following up from the Parliamentary Secretary, I think there's actually a great vacuum. There's a dearth of federal leadership. We've seen the Mental Health Commission do some work, but there hasn't been any kind of focus on a suicide prevention strategy. And so rather than suggesting that somehow the provinces and territories are going to have their toes stepped on, I think that there would be a welcoming, there'd be an opening of the debate and the dialogue if such a motion passed in the House and the federal government actually took it up. So I wonder if the member could speak a little bit more about what he envisions in terms of establishing a fund for a national suicide prevention strategy.
The honourable member for Toronto Centre.
I thank the member from Vancouver East, and having visited her riding many occasions, I think our ridings share many qualities in terms of some of the social challenges that we face together. The reason that we discuss a fund is quite simple, Madam Speaker. It's because it isn't about dictating to the provinces. It's about saying, look, the Mental Health Commission, we don't regard the Mental Health Commission as a boutique project. If it's going to succeed, the Mental Health Commission has to be followed by a serious commitment to saying, okay, how do we actually move these programs forward? I think that the Mental Health Initiative, which I certainly supported, was one because the Prime Minister, I think, to be fair to him, I think actually recognized this is an area where we haven't done enough. And all governments haven't done enough. But the era of experimentation seems to me there's a lot that we know what we have to do. And we have to sit down with the provinces and talk about how a fund can be put in place, what the fund would be used for, how the provinces would be able to draw on the fund, and the steps that need to be taken. I don't see it as, to use my phrase again, because I used to use it when I was in another place at another time, we don't need another federal boutique project. We need a serious exercise in partnership, and in which we also recognize that we, as a government, federal government, runs the 5th largest healthcare system in the country. We're not a bit player in this. We're a major player in this, and we have to take our responsibility seriously as we go forward. I appreciate
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Winnipeg North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to pick up on the word that the leader has used in terms of a partnership. As an MLA for 18 years in the province of Manitoba, even as a healthcare critic, the issue of trying to get the stakeholders coming together. So we're talking, when we talk about stakeholders, the different school divisions, even to a certain degree the municipal governments, we recognize that there's stakeholders at the government level, at the nonprofit level, a lot of individuals that have a vested interest. And I'm wondering if the leader could just provide some comment in terms of how it is that the leadership needs to come from here in Ottawa to try to bring those stakeholders together to try to draft that overall strategy.
The Honourable Member for Toronto Centre.
Madam Speaker, we've actually done it before. We've done it on cancer. We've done it together on a number of issues where the federal government has played a very useful role. And we're way behind where the experts are. I mean, the experts in the field, in our psychiatric hospitals, in our community-based care system, the associations across the country, those themselves who've been clients of the mental health care system, who are very active patients groups in society, in provinces and cities across the country. There's a huge network of people who are working in this field. I'm not suggesting for a moment that somehow we're inventing a set of answers. There is a National Association for the Prevention of Suicide. They're meeting, as we speak, they're meeting in Vancouver. They will be deciding, and they've come forward with a strategy themselves, which they want to recommend to governments. So we don't have to reinvent anything here. We're not imposing anything. We're just using, it seems to me, we're using this debate, and I hope the government will take it up with some action that will follow, that will say, here's some very specific things we can do. And we very much hope that that's an attitude the government will take as a result of this debate.
Resuming debate, the Honourable